say thank you for this opportunity to spend some time with you today and for the next couple months. And if we're real successful with some things that you'd like to do down here, then we're just going to have a lot of fun with it. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Al Ralston, and I've been involved in the governmental process mainly in Olympia for, this will be my 46th year. So I've been a lobbyist both as a corporate lobbyist and as a contract lobbyist, and I'll explain the difference. A corporate lobbyist, and I was a corporate lobbyist for 3 different organizations over the years, is someone that actually works for a business, works for a company, works for somebody, and so you are an employee. And for 21 of those 46 years, I was an employee of and the lobbyist for the Boeing Company. So with the Boeing Company being the largest business in the state, single business in the state, I had a lot of issues and a lot of responsibility to work mainly in Olympia, but I also had responsibilities in the state of Oregon at Salem at their capital, and also in Juneau in Alaska. And the good news was for the Boeing Company, I got to go to Hawaii a couple times a year and work on legislative issues in Honolulu. So for me, that was a whole lot of fun, although it wasn't that much fun having to wear a suit and tie when you're in Hawaii. But the good news is the first time I went, one of the legislators said, "We don't wear ties in Hawaii," and he proceeded to cut my tie off. So I never wore a tie again when I was in Hawaii. But as a corporate lobbyist, I worked on issues that were important to the company. And that was a whole lot of fun, and I really enjoyed my career working for the Boeing Company, which, as you know, is pretty important in the state of Washington. The other kind of lobbyist is a contract lobbyist, and that's where someone will hire you to work on an issue, either to try to pass some legislation or to keep some legislation from happening, to defeat legislation. And right now I'm a contract lobbyist, and I have a lot of different clients that pay me money to be able to work on issues that are important to them. And sometimes I'll work for, on a contract for a whole year, and sometimes I will work just during the legislative session, and once the session's over, then I'm no longer employed by them, and someone else will come along and I'll work for them. I should let you know that I've also done some work in Washington, D.C. I have a client right now that has me go to Washington, D.C. and work in Congress and sometimes work in the executive agencies in the president's office on issues that are important for my client. Now, my client is BECU, which is a credit union, the 4th largest credit union in the United States and the largest one in the state of Washington. And maybe some of you or your parents are members of BECU. So there, I see a hand raised in the back there. Corey, was that you? Yes, indeed. Okay, so I represent you on issues that are important to you in Washington, D.C. And in the past, I've had a chance to work with the government of Mexico, the government of Vietnam. I've been to China for the Boeing Company. And so I've had a really pretty good career in representing people and people's ideas to government. Now, have any of you, and raise your hands, have any of you been to Olympia and been to the legislature and seen the legislature in action? Perfect. I assume that you probably had if you've been in this class. And while a lot of people will look at government and go, I don't know what that is, it looks really boring, I don't want to have anything to do with it, the government has a really big impact on your lives and your family's lives. And that's why so many people, once they get elected, work on issues that are important for their community. But those issues in the community really have an impact on you. Sometimes it's a good impact, and sometimes it's a negative impact. And that's where I think it's really important for people like yourselves to try to understand what government is, and that you have an opportunity in this country to be a participant, to be able to have a role in deciding what laws go into effect that you want to have a positive impact on, or to keep something negative from happening to you. I have two daughters. They just graduated from college last year, and I keep telling them how lucky they are to be able to live in the United States, where you have a chance to impact your government by getting involved. Because in a lot of countries around the world, people like yourselves or my daughters don't really have a chance to have an impact on government. The government is dictatorial or doesn't take in the consideration of students or whatever, and you can be very negatively impacted by the laws that govern the country in a totalitarian environment. So I consider me to be very lucky. I consider my daughters to be very lucky, and I consider, hopefully you will consider yourselves to be very lucky to live in a country that gives you a chance to be involved with your government. Before I open it up to some of the ideas that you have on what you would like to be involved with during this legislative session that starts next Monday, I want to let you know that the reason I got involved as a lobbyist, when I was in college, I was 18 and 19 years of age and 20. People my age weren't allowed to vote. You had to be 21 years of age to be able to vote. And I thought it was really wrong that people who could get drafted into the Army and at that time to be involved and fight in a foreign war didn't have a chance to have an impact or at least a discussion about what the policy should be. So I worked really hard to help get the age to be able to vote from 21 down to 18 years of age, and to be a participant in our government to try to make it work, not only for me, but for my community. And I got really lucky in that I got to know a lot of people in government, and it led to a job. And my first job in Olympia was to work on staff in the State House of Representatives. And so I got to see and be part of the legislative process firsthand as a staff person, getting to write legislation, getting to get the chairman of the committee prepared for the committee hearings and the testimony going on. So that's how I started. And I've been able to make a living. It's been my job for a lot of years to make money for my family, to be involved in the governmental process. So if you consider that you've got the three branches of government, you've got the legislative branch with the House and the Senate, you've got the executive branch with the governor of the state of Washington or the president of the United States, and then you have the judicial branch with the Supreme Court to determine what the laws really mean if there's a disagreement. There's a fourth, not a formal branch of government, but that is the lobbying branch, and that's what I'm part of, and that's what you all will be part of in trying to work on some legislation for this session. With that, I'm open to any questions that you have about me, but then I also want to move on and listen to you and see what it is that you would like to have me do on your behalf. I'm your employee. I consider you my boss, all of you as my boss, to give me direction on what it is that you want me to do as we work together on an issue in Olympia of importance that you pick. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions that you have about me or about my career. And then Corey, if you want, we can also jump into some of the pieces of legislation and try to answer any questions you have with some potential proposals that I can work on for you.
Absolutely. I think that some of the questions that we were fielding this morning had to do with the bill on political redistricting or the Voting Rights Act, and maybe that bill was really long and had a lot of what we call, the legalese in there.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you could kind of break that down and talk about what that bill really says so they can know whether they would want to choose that to follow.
Sure. In the state of Washington, there's a redistricting commission that decides what the legislative districts are for the state legislature. But there are also local governments that will decide what their voting districts are. Actually, in some communities, city council members are elected at large, and you may have a very strong minority population. An example would be Yakima or the cities in the Tri-Cities like Pasco. And there has been some suggestion and evidence that minority voters, because of the way the districts are established, don't have a fair chance of being able to elect people that are of the same minority group. In this case, it's Hispanics to city councils. There was a lawsuit a few years ago that went all the way through, I think, to the Supreme Court that said districts have to be representative of the people that live in them. And so in Yakima, they redistricted, they changed the lines that allowed for the minority vote to not be diluted by the way the lines were drawn. And there were 3 Hispanic city council members that were elected, one of whom was appointed as mayor. And the Voting Rights Act that is being proposed by Senator Saldana is to ratify that into state law, what was dealt with by the court. And so would be an affirmation of what was done by the courts through the legislative process. It seems complicated, but I don't think it's a particularly complicated issue, but it's one that deals with fairness and the rights of minorities to be represented at the local government level. And Senator Saldana is Hispanic and fairly new to the Senate. This issue was held up when the Republicans had control of the Senate, but now that the Democrats have control, there's going to be this attempt to try to move this legislation forward in the Senate and the House. Does that help?
Questions about this piece of legislation? Ben, you have a question? Just say it loud. Yeah, just ask your question. Be loud.
Is it possible to stop gerrymandering without disrupting other counties or districts?
I think the answer is yes. And the issue of gerrymandering is really kind of in the eyes of whoever's involved with the process. And what the court case said is, while it appears that it was gerrymandering, and it was gerrymandering, the people that had put the lines together didn't think that it was. But the result is that the white populations ended up electing more non-Hispanic people in strong Hispanic areas, but by the way the lines were drawn. The answer to your question is, this is going to be an attempt to stop that practice. That's what the legislation is going to try to do.
Does anyone have any other questions about this voting piece of legislation? Okay. All right, what about any of the other pieces that you guys looked at? Is there any other ones that you guys want to bring up to talk about? Oliver?
So I believe it was the House Bill 2365. Why is that bill necessary? Like, what does legislation will happen?
Well, that's a really good question, and I haven't done enough research on it to find out. But usually when you find these kind of strange pieces of legislation, it's because somebody has an interest. It's probably a group of mushroom collectors that think it would be really cool to have a state fungus recognized. You know, there's a state bird, there's a state flower. A few years ago, there was an argument over what the state song should be, and there was a big, huge fight in the legislature. On the surface, it's kind of silly and doesn't make doesn't change the world. But to some people, it's important that the pine mushroom be recognized as the state fungus. But I haven't done enough research to find out exactly why that's the case. The world will not change, I don't think, if this legislation doesn't pass.
So there's a bunch of other questions on the board. Does anyone else have any other questions, Ben?
For House Bill 2311,
Right.
what is a
Go ahead. What's your question with it?
they repeatedly mentioned it, and it wasn't very clear what it was.
You know, I read it, and I'm not really sure I understand either, but Representative Berquist comes from Renton, and in the city of Renton is the headquarters for the Washington Interscholastic Athletic Association, so they may have an issue, and they as a group came to Representative Berquist and said, hey, we'd like to have some clarification on this, but we need to have state legislation to do it. And in terms of the background on it, I really don't know. I'd have to do a little bit more research, but Representative Berquist, I know, would be very open to trying to answer that, and I can find out for you a little bit more information on it.
McKenna?
I was wondering that if that bill passes, how it would affect the state budget.
The bill 2311 dealing with extracurricular activities.
Yeah, because it's saying that the maximum amount that they'd have to pay would be $5, so more money would be like put into that activity from those activities from the state budget. So I was wondering how it would affect it.
It's a good question, and because the bill was just drafted and dropped in as a pre-filed bill, I haven't seen that there's been a fiscal note requested. A fiscal note is something that's done on legislation that has an impact to the state budget or to a local government, and I don't see that one has been done yet. It would have an impact, but I don't know that it would be, you know, $1 million or even $500,000, but I don't know. If you're interested in it, I can certainly look at it. And my advice to you is this is going to be a short session. It's only going to be upwards of 60 days, I think. It could go a little longer. So we don't have a whole lot of time to decide which issue we want to deal with. But if you've got questions on some of these bills, I can work on trying to get an answer and then get that back to Corey for you all to have. Before we get on our next teleconference.
Well, and what might be a bill that would be interesting for them to follow, but that might also have a little bit of controversy involved in it so that we can, you know, see maybe some media reporting on it or definitely some difference of opinions?
I think there's 3 bills that I've highlighted that will have some of that. Probably the one that will have the most controversy is the first one we talked about, and that's the enacting the Voting Rights Act of 2018. That will have controversy because there's going to be some people who think the present system is okay, and we know that there were some in the Republican Party didn't want it to pass last year when they were in control of the Senate. Not all of them, but there were some. So that one will certainly have some controversy, and there will be a lot of press activity on it. Another one that actually there's 2 others. One is 2338, and that's by Representative Fitzgibbons, and that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions related to fuels. It basically provides that gasoline guzzling automobiles have to reduce emissions or the number be reduced and move toward electric vehicles or non-fossil fuel burning vehicles over a period of time. It has a hearing scheduled actually for next week, and I know Representative Fitzgibbons, he's in leadership in the House of Representatives in the Democratic caucus, and so this one will have some legs to it. But we'll have some controversy. It depends on whether or not businesses will get some exclusions to it because they may not be able to convert the fleet of vehicles, their trucks or vehicles that they have as part of their business in time. But a hearing next week will provide a lot of data and information on it. And the other one is Senate Bill 6048, and that's by Senator Cooterer, which raises the age limit for the sale of tobacco and vaping products is a health issue. And I know the tobacco industry will be opposed to it. So you're going to have a big industry, a big business They may not be out front on it, but you know, they will have some concerns about changing the age for smoking in the state. So those two, well, actually those three, the Voting Rights Act, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Bill, and the sale of tobacco and vaping products, I think will all have some controversy to them, actually quite a bit, any one of those three.
Thank you. Caitlin, question?
On Senate Bill 6048, will it be effective and how will it be enforced?
Well, currently the age in which you can purchase tobacco is 18. Some states have moved it back up to 21 where it used to be, and that's the intent of the bill, is to move the sale of tobacco products up to 21, including vaping products. The current enforcement is done both at the local level and at the state level, and it will just change the enforcement from 18 to 21. And so if you go into a store and you're 19 or 20, if the bill passes, and you get caught, or the store gets caught in selling it, because they have sting operations that will send underage people in to try to purchase tobacco products, and if the store sells it, then the store gets a fine and maybe even the loss of their license to sell the product. So I think that will continue. It'll just be a change in the age rather than anything else, moving it from 18 to 21, but they'll still have the Department of Health enforcement of it, but just at a different age.
Jacob?
Will that bill cause massive or even any job loss because there will be less revenue to stores because they can't sell to those people?
Well, it's a good question. It probably could have a fiscal impact because you're reducing a chunk of the population that's not eligible to purchase it anymore. But the incidence of, and there's a lot of this that I don't know, but the incidence of smoking is being reduced anyway. So there's a lessening of revenue over time, whether you're 18 or 21. So I think it will just probably accelerate some of that. But it's being reduced anyway. But it'll also have an impact on health issues at the other end, rather than having people with emphysema or lung cancer or whatnot that are on public assistance. It could reduce that over time. So you'd see a change in how much is being paid for indigent care, for the care of people that would go into hospitals that can't afford the care. So I see it more as an offset.
Can I see from a show of hands amongst you who, just on first glance from what you hear, what sort of bills you'd like to follow? It looks like, you know, our first choice of the Voting Rights Act, that's more of a political, social sustainability sort of bill. We have the greenhouse gas bill, that's going to be more of our environmental sustainability bill. And then tobacco, this is going to have some economics, certainly a lot of economics, especially with the tobacco companies involved. It's big business. So really we're looking social, environmental, economic, all those have to do it. But can I have kind of a show of hands who, and we're going to do a little bit more research before we decide, but just on your first glance, who thinks that you'd be more interested in the tobacco bill? Okay, cool, hands down. What about the greenhouse gases bill? Cool, hands down. And then what about the Voting Rights Act? Okay, cool, hands down. Okay, so I think, I know we're running out of time here, but I think what we'll do is do a little bit more research on each of these. And then before our next meeting, I can get back to you and we can choose one and then talk more in depth about the language involved in it.
Sounds good. That's a great way to go. And being your employee, that will help me work on a strategy of being successful for any one of the three. And I will look at them, any one of the three as well, or all three of them, to see what the chances of success are and what the sponsors are saying.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Are there any final questions about any of these bills before we take off? Is it possible for you guys to look more bored? Oh, hello. Okay. Welcome back. Yeah, so I think that's what we'll do, and we'll take a look at this, and it fits really well with what we've already been studying this year. So thank you for bringing these forward. I know they'd like to follow the fungi bill as well.
Well, we can do that on the side. We can have, a little side project too. I'm happy to do that as well.
Great. A side fungi bill. I thought we could look at it on the side, but it probably wouldn't drive our, focus.
Got it. I understand.
Great. Well, thank you so much for meeting with us.
Well, thank you a whole lot too. I really appreciate the time. And remember, you're my boss.
Okay, we'll come up with some opinions then.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Al. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.